Have you ever been stuck on a long flight, hoping for a bit of peace, maybe even planning to catch up on some sleep or just zone out with a movie, and then, suddenly, a baby starts crying nonstop? It's one of those moments most people silently dread. We've all been there, right? You try to stay calm, tell yourself it's not the baby's fault. They're just scared, uncomfortable, or maybe in pain. But not everyone on board sees it that way. Some people lose it. Some make a scene. And that's exactly what happened on this flight. But what nobody expected, what not a single soul on that plane saw coming, was what the flight attendant did next. Her announcement didn't just quiet the cabin. It changed everything. What started as a routine complaint turned into something much, much bigger. And by the end of the flight, people weren't just talking about a crying baby anymore. They were applauding. Literally. Now hold on, don't even think about skipping ahead. Because what happened here touches something deeper in all of us. This isn't just a story about a baby or an annoyed passenger. This is about judgment. About how quick we are to snap before we understand someone's truth. It's about the power of empathy, especially when it comes from the most unexpected place. And believe me, you will want to hear how this ends, because the twist, it's not something you'd guess in 100 tries. And yes, I will give you the full answer. The very one you came here for. I promise that. But only if you stay with me, because this story unfolds in layers. And every moment you see, every word you hear, builds to that jaw-dropping moment when everything clicks. Let's slow down for a second and really think about the last time you were on a plane. Think about the cramped seats, the recycled air, the stiff silence between strangers all trying to mind their own business. Now imagine that sterile, tense atmosphere being pierced by a baby's sharp cries. That's exactly the pressure cooker environment we're about to step into. This flight, headed from Los Angeles to Atlanta, a route that's usually uneventful, became the center of a story that would go viral on TikTok, explode on Twitter, or X if we're being current, and ignite a firestorm in the comments section across social media. The man who started the confrontation? He thought he had every right to speak his mind. He thought he was doing what most of the passengers secretly wanted to do. But he didn't expect the entire cabin to turn against him, or that a single flight attendant would command the whole plane's attention with just a few words. And here's where things get really interesting. She didn't shame him or yell back.
No.
She made an announcement that turned awkward silence into stunned respect and revealed a hidden truth that not only justified the baby's cries, but revealed something heroic about the mother sitting there silently taking the blame. But before we get there, let me ask you something a little deeper, something most people won't say out loud, but I know you've probably thought at least once. Have you ever judged someone before knowing their full story? Caught yourself making assumptions, even if just in your head? That's the psychology we're tapping into here. Because this story shines a light on the quiet ways we all react when we're uncomfortable, when we feel inconvenienced, or when someone else's struggle disrupts our comfort zone. This video isn't just here to entertain. It's here to make you feel. And the reason I'm telling it this way is because I want you to walk away remembering it, maybe even changing a little because of it. That's the difference between a moment and a movement. And today, you're part of the latter. Let me bring you closer to the main characters. First, there's Mark. He's in his late 40s, well-dressed, confident, and carrying that kind of energy that screams, I travel a lot and I expect things to go smoothly. He boards the plane early, settles into his seat in first class, pulls out his noise-canceling headphones, and prepares for a quiet flight. Across the aisle and a few rows back, we have Rachel. She's in her early 30s, wearing a hoodie, hair a bit frazzled, trying to juggle a carry-on bag, a diaper bag, and her 8-month-old baby girl, Emily, who's already fussing before takeoff. Rachel looks tired. Not just didn't sleep well, tired. She looks bone-deep exhausted. The kind of tired that tells you she's doing this whole motherhood thing on her own. And Mark? He notices her right away. His expression says it all. This is going to be a nightmare. Fast forward 20 minutes. The plane is still taxiing, not even in the air yet. Emily's crying louder now, squirming in Rachel's lap. Rachel is whispering, trying to comfort her, bouncing her gently, but nothing's working. The man in front of her is already glancing back. Someone further up rings the attendant button. And that's when it happens. Mark takes off his headphones with dramatic flair, leans into the aisle, and says loud enough for half the cabin to hear, "Can someone do something about that baby?" The entire plane stiffens. You could feel the collective intake of breath. He's not whispering, he's not being polite. He's angry. "I paid over $1,000 for this seat," he continues. "I didn't pay to be screamed at by a baby for 3 hours. This is ridiculous." Rachel freezes. You can see the panic and embarrassment spread across her face. She's not yelling back. She's not even crying. She just holds Emily tighter, looks down, and tries to become invisible. And that's when the flight attendant, Jasmine, steps in. Young, maybe late 20s, composed, calm, but there's something in her eyes that tells you she's not just about to brush this off. She leans toward Mark with a professional smile, the kind that hides fire behind it. "Sir," she says, "I understand your frustration, but please give me one moment." And here's where everything flips. Because instead of walking away or whispering something to the pilot, Jasmine grabs the intercom mic. The usual "we've reached cruising altitude" kind of announcement doesn't come. Instead, she says something that instantly quiets the plane. Something so unexpected, so personal, that even Mark, still seething in his seat, slowly turns his head and listens. What she says next, well, let's just say, it reveals something about Rachel no one on that plane, not even Mark, could have imagined. It explains everything. But more importantly, it forces every single person on that flight, including you right now watching this video, to question what they would have done in that moment. Would you have complained? Would you have offered help? Or would you have just sat there in silence, hoping someone else would handle it? And here's why you need to stay until the end of this video. Because the full story behind Jasmine's announcement didn't just change the tone of that flight. It made national news. It sparked conversations online that people are still debating. What she revealed about Rachel, and what Rachel had never planned to tell anyone, was something that hit so deeply, so unexpectedly. It shifted the mood from annoyance to absolute awe. Mark's face when he heard the truth? You'll want to see it. And how the rest of the passengers reacted. Let's just say, some of them didn't just apologize, they cried. And what happened after the plane landed? That's the kind of real-life ending that makes fiction look dull. So don't click away now. If you do, you'll miss the part that brings it all together. The one detail that flips this story from an everyday travel annoyance to something unforgettable. Because stories like this don't just go viral for the drama. They go viral because they show us something about ourselves, about how much kindness matters, about how powerful it is when someone chooses understanding over judgment. And I promise you, by the end of this video, you'll see that baby, that mom, that complaining man, and even that flight attendant in a completely different light. So buckle up, stay locked in, and let's take off into the heart of a story that started with frustration and ended in one of the most powerful in-flight moments ever caught on camera. But just as Jasmine raised the mic to speak, the plane suddenly hit turbulence, causing everyone to brace themselves. And in that split second of chaos, Rachel's phone slipped out of her hoodie pocket, revealing a text on her screen that no one was meant to see. Jasmine's voice had just started to crackle through the cabin speakers when the sudden jolt of turbulence caught everyone off guard. The overhead compartments rattled, drinks trembled in plastic cups, and the mood on board shifted from tense discomfort to a collective grip of nervous anticipation. Seatbelt signs blinked back to life as the flight steadied itself, but all eyes weren't on the controls or the weather outside the window. They were still locked on Rachel, on her now silent baby, and on the small smartphone that had slid halfway into the aisle, its screen still glowing faintly. The flight attendant's fingers hesitated over the mic, her focus momentarily drawn to the device. But it wasn't just her. 2 passengers sitting nearby had caught a glimpse of that screen too, and while they didn't say a word, their expressions had clearly changed. Not with anger, not with sympathy, but with something closer to curiosity, maybe even confusion, because what they saw didn't quite fit the picture they had formed of the tired, quiet young woman with a crying infant. The screen had displayed a single text message, not from a family member, not a work email or a doctor's reminder. It read, "Are you sure they won't recognize you?" That was it. Just that single question. And yet, in the context of everything happening, it carried the weight of 1,000 more. Recognize her from what? Was Rachel someone she claimed not to be? Was this flight just a means to an end, or an escape from something far more serious? As the turbulence passed and the flight returned to an eerie calm, Jasmine picked up the phone and handed it back to Rachel with a polite smile that didn't quite mask the questions flickering in her mind. Rachel thanked her in a whisper, her eyes avoiding contact, her hands trembling slightly as she tucked the phone deep into the diaper bag beside her seat. Baby Emily, strangely enough, had fallen asleep, as if lulled by the chaos instead of disturbed by it. But while the noise had ceased, the storm hadn't passed, not in the cabin, and certainly not in the minds of the passengers who had now seen something they couldn't unsee. Mark, meanwhile, sat stiffly in his seat, arms folded tight, his expression still sour, but his posture more guarded than before. He wasn't looking at Rachel anymore. In fact, he seemed to be looking anywhere but in her direction. Not out of guilt, necessarily, but as if he too had started to feel that there was more to this woman's story than met the eye. And he wasn't wrong, because Rachel hadn't planned on flying to Atlanta. She hadn't even packed for a return trip. What she carried, besides a baby and a few essentials, wasn't just baggage. It was a past she was running from, a secret tangled in a relationship that had collapsed just days before. Just 4 days earlier, Rachel had been living in San Diego with someone she had trusted more than anyone, her fiancé, Derek. From the outside, their life looked perfect. A 2-bedroom apartment close to the beach, smiling social media posts full of sunset walks and baby milestones, a nursery painted in soft pinks and grays, everything meticulously planned for the future. But behind closed doors, it had started unraveling. Derek, a paramedic by profession, had become distant ever since Emily's birth. Long shifts turned into missed calls. Gentle disagreements turned into shouting matches. And then, 2 weeks ago, Rachel found something on his tablet, an encrypted message thread hidden behind a generic health app. She wasn't a snoop by nature, but after weeks of Derek refusing to talk, she couldn't help but look closer. What she found was enough to shake her entire foundation. Secret meetups, references to keeping her quiet, and one chilling message that simply read, "She can't know the truth about the clinic." Rachel didn't sleep that night. She didn't confront Derek. She didn't tell anyone. Instead, she waited. She watched. She called her sister in Georgia and said she might be visiting sooner than expected. And when Derek left for an overnight shift, she packed only what she needed. Diapers, formula, a few onesies, and her passport, just in case. But something about her leaving so quickly made her uneasy. She felt eyes on her at the airport. Saw a man at the TSA checkpoint glance at her boarding pass twice. And when she switched terminals last minute, choosing Atlanta over her original ticket to Chicago, she noticed that same man, still a few gates behind. Could she have imagined it? Maybe. But paranoia isn't always baseless. And if Derek knew she had read those messages, who else might he have told? Her stomach turned at the thought. So now, here she was, thousands of feet in the air, unsure of whether she was escaping or walking straight into the next part of a twisted plan. And that text, the one that flashed across her phone, proved that someone, somewhere, was watching her moves. The question of identity lingered in the cabin air now, like static waiting to snap. Rachel didn't look dangerous. She looked like any young mom fighting through a tough moment. But now the passengers were looking at her through a different lens. Was she a victim? Was she hiding from something, or hiding something? The turbulence had unsettled more than the plane's altitude. It had cracked the illusion that this was just another inconvenient family flight. Now, there were layers. Now there were questions. And that's when the red herrings began to surface. First was the older woman sitting in the window seat near the emergency exit, quietly knitting from the moment she boarded. She had smiled at Rachel warmly when she first walked in, but since the outburst, she hadn't taken her eyes off her. And more curiously, she had stopped knitting. Just sat there, motionless, listening, watching. Something about her stillness didn't sit right. Then there was the man in the back row, wearing a baseball cap pulled low over his face. He never stood, never spoke, but every time Rachel glanced behind her, his gaze seemed fixed just beyond her seat. Even Jasmine had noted him on her walkthrough, noticing he'd refused even a drink or snack. There was something tense in his posture, a stiffness that made her write a quick note to the co-pilot, just in case they needed to check on him later. But perhaps the most confusing figure was Mark himself. Because after all his shouting and grandstanding, he had gone quiet. Too quiet. He pulled out his phone mid-flight, not to scroll through apps or check messages, but to open what looked like a document. He zoomed in on a photo, then another. Faces. IDs. Was he just an annoyed passenger, or someone with his own reasons for flying that day? Who was Mark, really? The flight's midway point came with another round of mild turbulence, but by now, everyone was bracing less from the bumps in the air and more from the growing uncertainty below the surface. Jasmine hadn't made another announcement yet. She seemed to be buying time, waiting for the right moment, for the right clarity. Rachel had resumed feeding Emily with slow, calculated motions, while darting nervous glances at her surroundings. The phone now remained in her bag, buried beneath a baby blanket and a spare pacifier. And then came another moment, small but telling. The older woman by the emergency exit reached into her purse and dropped something on the floor. Jasmine approached to help, only to find it wasn't knitting supplies or medication. It was a badge. Faded, partially covered by a wallet flap, but unmistakably federal. Jasmine didn't say a word, didn't react, but she knew what she saw. And in that moment, the stakes of this flight changed again. Someone on this plane wasn't just here for business or vacation. Someone was watching. Maybe watching Rachel. Maybe someone else. But the fact that a federal badge was on board meant this wasn't just a coincidence. There was an operation at play. And if Rachel wasn't the suspect, was she the target? No one on that flight knew the full truth. Not yet. But with every minute in the air, it became clearer that this wasn't going to be just another routine landing. Something or someone was going to be waiting at that gate. And the question wasn't just whether Rachel would get off the plane unnoticed. It was whether she should. Just as the cabin lights dimmed and the hum of the engines returned to its steady lull, Rachel let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. But her moment of quiet was abruptly cut short when she reached for her diaper bag to retrieve her phone. It was gone. The exact pocket she had zipped it into earlier now felt suspiciously light. She dug deeper, then checked the outer compartment. Nothing. Panic rose in her chest. Her mind raced through a million explanations. Maybe it slid out. Maybe she left it in the restroom. Maybe Emily kicked it loose during the earlier turbulence. But deep down, she knew better. That bag had never left her lap. Someone had taken it. And whoever had taken it now held the key to everything she was trying to figure out, everything she was trying to run from. That phone didn't just hold her contacts or messages. It had screenshots of Derek's encrypted texts, a backup of his hidden files, and a voice memo she recorded the night she found him arguing with someone on a burner phone. It was all there. Gone. Rachel's eyes darted around the cabin, trying to stay calm, trying not to draw attention, but every passenger now looked like a potential threat. The older woman by the exit row hadn't moved. Still knitting, or pretending to. The man with the baseball cap hadn't shifted either, but his eyes now seemed more aware. Jasmine had stepped into the front galley to refill a water jug, and Rachel considered whether to ask for help or to keep pretending everything was normal. She looked down at Emily, still sleeping peacefully in her arms, oblivious to the chaos bubbling just beneath the surface. And that's when a folded napkin appeared on her tray table. No hand, no eye contact. It was just there, neatly folded, anonymous. She hesitated before opening it, her fingers trembling as she peeled it apart. Inside, written in a rushed but clear hand, were 5 words that made her heart nearly stop. Stop asking questions. For Emily. No signature. No initials. Just a warning, and not a subtle one. Rachel looked up instantly, scanning the rows around her. No one was looking directly at her. They were flipping through Sky Mall magazines, watching reruns of sitcoms, chatting about hotels and rental cars like any other flight. But she knew someone had written that note. Someone who had been watching her closely enough to notice that she was digging, that she was desperate. And now they wanted her to stop. The problem was, Rachel couldn't stop, not now. Not when everything in her gut told her she was closer than ever to learning the truth. That text message earlier, the one asking if she'd be recognized, had to mean Derek had set her up for something. Maybe not directly, but possibly by putting her in the middle of something much darker than she realized. She had spent the last week thinking Derek was just unfaithful, that he had lied about his overtime shifts and secret meetings. But this felt bigger. There were federal agents on board, people who didn't act like regular passengers. And if Derek was involved in something illegal, medical fraud, patient trafficking, or even identity theft, then maybe he wasn't just worried about her leaving him. Maybe he was afraid she knew too much. Still shaken, Rachel stood and carefully stepped toward the rear of the cabin under the pretense of changing Emily's diaper. It gave her a moment away from the eyes and ears and let her think clearly, if only for a few minutes. Inside the lavatory, she locked the door, sat Emily down on the changing table, and whispered gently to her daughter, even as her own nerves screamed. She needed that phone back. She needed to figure out who on this flight was a threat and who, if anyone, she could trust. But when she rejoined the cabin, Jasmine was waiting in the aisle, her expression calm but clearly forced. "Miss Keller," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper, "a man in first class said he saw your phone fall near his seat earlier. I can retrieve it if you'd like." Rachel froze. That didn't make sense. First class was separated by a partition and forward galley. Her seat was nowhere near there. But she nodded slowly, careful not to show her confusion. A few minutes later, Jasmine returned and handed her the phone, but Rachel knew instantly that something was off. The case was the same. The lock screen photo of Emily was still there. But when she unlocked it, every single folder of evidence, every message, voice memo, photo, was wiped. The phone had been factory reset. She nearly dropped it. Everything was gone. Before she could react, Jasmine leaned in just slightly, pretending to point at the in-flight menu. "Don't say anything," she murmured. "There's more going on here than you realize. And I'm not the only one trying to keep you safe." Rachel blinked, trying to process whether Jasmine had just revealed herself as an ally or was playing another angle entirely. How did she know Rachel had evidence? How did she know it was gone? And what did she mean by more going on? The questions piled up, heavier with every second. But Jasmine was already walking away, as if nothing had happened, her face returning to its usual calm, customer service expression. That moment rewired everything. If Jasmine wasn't just a flight attendant, if she was involved somehow, then the lines of who to trust had just blurred even more. Was she protecting Rachel? Or was she protecting someone else? What exactly did she mean by keeping her safe, and from what? Just as Rachel sat down again, still holding Emily tightly, she noticed something tucked into the seat back pocket in front of her. A ticket stub. Not hers. Not even from this flight. It was from a completely different airline, dated 3 days ago, on a route from San Diego to Denver. The name on the ticket? Derek M. Collin. Her fiancé. Rachel had known he flew anywhere last week. He had told her he was doing a double shift on the ambulance. But clearly, he had lied again. Denver wasn't near his family. He had no business there. So why did he go? Who did he meet? And how had this stub ended up in her seat? The air around her tightened again. Someone was sending a message. Or maybe just leaving breadcrumbs. Either way, Rachel knew now that Derek wasn't just being deceitful. He was running operations behind her back. And if he was bold enough to fly cross-country while pretending to be at work, what else was he capable of? The pieces were spreading out in front of her like a puzzle with half the edges missing. A phone wiped clean. A note threatening her child. A flight attendant with coded warnings. A stranger's ticket stub planted in her seat. And a man who claimed to love her, possibly leading her into something much darker than she ever imagined. Every question answered only cracked open 5 more. And then, just as she was about to alert Jasmine or confront anyone, a sudden noise cracked through the speaker system. But this time, it wasn't turbulence. It wasn't the routine message. It was the co-pilot, his voice tight and oddly nervous. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "we've been instructed to hold pattern due to an unexpected situation at our destination gate. Please remain seated, and we'll update you shortly." Rachel looked up, her heart pounding. Something was happening on the ground. And it wasn't just weather or scheduling delays. What exactly were they flying into, and who was waiting for her when the wheels finally touched down? While Rachel sat frozen in her seat, her thoughts spiraling with each possible meaning behind the co-pilot's cryptic message, hundreds of miles away, another thread in this tangled web was quietly unraveling. Back in Chicago, Rachel's younger sister, Megan, stood in the narrow hallway of her third-floor walk-up, clutching a manila envelope she had just retrieved from the apartment lobby. There was no return address, no markings aside from her name scrawled in large, uneven letters across the front, letters that felt strangely familiar, as if written by someone who had known her handwriting for years. Inside the envelope was nothing but a single flash drive and a typed note that simply read, "You don't know the whole truth. Your sister is in danger. Play the file alone." At first, Megan thought it was some sort of prank or a scam. But the moment she inserted the flash drive into her laptop, the screen went black, and a grainy video clip began to play. There was no timestamp, no intro, just the shaky image of a hotel hallway. The camera panned slowly, deliberately, then paused on a door marked 319. A figure entered the frame, tall, lean, wearing a hood. The face wasn't clear, but the man's posture, the way he glanced over his shoulder, how he hesitated before pulling a key card from his pocket, it was unmistakably Derek. Megan's stomach dropped. She leaned in closer as the door opened and Derek slipped inside. The camera feed cut out a second later, replaced by a distorted audio clip. It was low quality, muffled, but the voice was crystal clear. "She can't find out. Not yet. If she gets involved, we lose everything." Megan recoiled from the screen. Her hands trembled as she closed the laptop, heart racing. Whoever sent this had been watching Derek. More than that, they were clearly tracking both him and Rachel. But why send it to her? And why now? Megan hadn't seen her sister in person for weeks. They'd been distant lately, ever since Megan had questioned Derek's integrity and Rachel had accused her of being jealous or dramatic. But this changed everything. If Rachel truly didn't know what Derek was involved in, then she might be walking into something much darker than either of them had imagined. Back on the plane, Rachel felt an eerie stillness settle over the cabin. The seatbelt sign remained lit, and yet passengers were starting to murmur in confusion. A mother in row 12 leaned across the aisle to whisper to her partner. A businessman kept checking his smartwatch, and the man in the baseball cap, who earlier seemed indifferent, was now wide-eyed, fidgeting with his phone in a way that made Rachel's skin crawl. Then, just as suddenly as the first announcement, the co-pilot's voice returned, but this time, there was something sharper behind it. "We've been asked to remain airborne for security clearance at our destination. Federal personnel will be meeting us upon arrival. Again, please remain seated and calm." The word federal hit Rachel like a punch to the chest. Her instincts screamed that this wasn't routine. They weren't waiting for a gate. They were circling for a reason. Maybe someone on this plane had triggered an alert. Maybe someone, maybe even her, was now a person of interest. But why? She wasn't the criminal. She wasn't the one lying, vanishing, erasing data and leaving mysterious clues. That was Derek. Yet Rachel was the one being watched, the one being warned, the one being followed, and now, perhaps, the one being set up. As the plane banked slightly and began what felt like a slow descent, Rachel's thoughts were interrupted by the woman across the aisle, soft-spoken, mid-50s, wearing a navy cardigan. She leaned over slightly and said, "I saw what happened earlier. When they returned your phone. That wasn't a tech issue, was it?" Rachel blinked. Her throat was dry, but she nodded slowly. "No," she whispered. The woman didn't flinch. She simply reached into her purse and handed Rachel a small folded note, not unlike the one Rachel had received earlier. This was slipped under the restroom door when I went in after you, the woman said. I don't know what it means, but I think you should see it. Rachel unfolded the note. Her stomach lurched. It read, You were never supposed to board this flight. They made a mistake. Made a mistake? Who? The airline? The agents? Derek? The note didn't make sense. Not fully, but it implied something that made Rachel's blood run cold. Someone behind the scenes had orchestrated something, and now it was unraveling. In Chicago, Megan's instincts took over. She grabbed her coat and headed straight to the nearest precinct. If the feds were involved, she needed someone official to look at the footage. But as she approached the counter and began explaining what she'd seen, Derek, the hotel room, the anonymous package, she was cut off by a plainclothes officer who stepped forward and said, Ma'am, I'm going to need you to come with me. Why? She asked, backing away slightly. The officer didn't raise his voice. We've been monitoring Rachel Keller's known associates, and we believe you've just received classified information. You're not in trouble, but you need to come with us, now. Megan's heart sank. It wasn't just about Derek anymore. It wasn't even just about Rachel. This ran deeper. Whatever Derek was part of, it had caught the attention of federal surveillance, and now Megan was a part of it too. But if she was being tracked, how many others were? And who had been feeding her the truth? Back on the plane, Rachel turned to look behind her. That's when she saw it, an air marshal quietly signaling to the flight attendants near the rear of the cabin. Their movements were subtle but coordinated. And Jasmine? She wasn't anywhere to be seen. Gone from view. The air around her thickened with fear and confusion. Who exactly were they coming for? And what had she walked into by simply boarding this flight with her daughter? As the wheels finally touched down and the aircraft began to taxi toward the gate, Rachel held Emily tighter than ever. Whatever was waiting outside that cabin door, it wasn't going to be simple. And it definitely wasn't going to be safe. As the cabin door finally creaked open and passengers began filing off the plane with forced calm, Rachel clutched Emily tightly against her chest, her senses stretched thin, and her thoughts spiraling into dark territory she hadn't dared imagine before. The air outside the plane was dense with humidity, but it wasn't the weather that made her skin clammy. It was the eerie stillness that followed them down the jet bridge. Every step felt rehearsed, like they were walking straight into a trap. She scanned the terminal for familiar faces, searching for Jasmine, but there was no sign of the cheerful flight attendant who had comforted her earlier. In her place stood two stern-looking TSA agents flanking a man in a navy suit who didn't speak, didn't smile, and didn't blink. He simply raised a hand and gestured for Rachel to step aside from the disembarking crowd. At first, she resisted, tried to pass it off as a misunderstanding, but then the suited man leaned in and whispered her full name, including her middle name, which wasn't on her boarding pass. That single detail turned her veins to ice. He knew things he shouldn't. She tried to ask where Jasmine had gone, but he cut her off with a soft but chilling line. She's not your concern anymore. His voice carried an unspoken warning, and for a moment, Rachel's maternal instincts kicked in like a fire alarm. Something was terribly, unmistakably wrong. She followed quietly as instructed, gripping Emily so tightly the child squirmed. They were led not to a private security room, but through a side exit, across a dark service corridor, and into an unmarked black SUV waiting just beyond a chain-link gate. Rachel's mouth went dry. Inside the vehicle was a tablet secured to the back of the front seat, already displaying an image of Derek, except not the Derek she knew. This was a mugshot. Below it, a file labeled Level 3, Fugitive Surveillance. Her head swam. She turned to demand answers, but the agent in the front passenger seat simply activated the screen and let the automated voice speak. You are being taken into protective custody due to your proximity to a classified person of interest. Your movements will be restricted for your safety. Do not attempt contact with external parties. It was too much. Rachel's heart pounded in her chest like a war drum as she clutched Emily, trying to shield her from the madness unfolding in real time. Derek was a fugitive? Since when? And why hadn't anyone told her? Unless, of course, they believed she already knew. Was this all connected to the flash drive Megan had received? To the hotel footage? to the note warning she was never supposed to board the flight. Her mind raced back to Jasmine's kindness, her note, and now, her sudden disappearance. Was Jasmine even a flight attendant at all? The car pulled onto a quiet road just outside the airport and then stopped abruptly. Without warning, the suited man in the back seat reached for Rachel's phone and crushed it beneath his heel, offering no explanation other than a curt, "We can't afford trackers." That's when Rachel realized this wasn't protection. This was containment. She wasn't a witness or a victim anymore. She was a liability. Suddenly, the SUV's radio crackled with static, and a voice barked, "Unit 6, abort extraction. Target compromised. Repeat, abort. She's been made." The driver swore under his breath, hit the accelerator, and peeled off the road, jerking Rachel violently against her seatbelt. Emily began to cry again, this time sensing the fear radiating off her mother like waves of heat. Rachel's thoughts were a jumbled mess of terror and confusion, but one thing became agonizingly clear. Whoever these people were, they weren't with the government, or at least not the government she trusted. And the person she believed was watching over her, Jasmine, might have been her only real ally. Back in Chicago, Megan never made it into the precinct. As she was led toward an unmarked door in the back hallway of the police station, the officer guiding her suddenly turned pale and fumbled for his radio. "Control, we've got a code shadow. Target's sister is gone. Repeat, she's gone." Megan's instincts screamed at her, and she ran. Bolted. Down the hall, out a fire exit, across the parking lot. She had no idea where to go, but she knew she couldn't trust anyone anymore. Whoever was watching Rachel was watching her too, and now the question wasn't who sent the flash drive, it was why. Why had they wanted her to know the truth? Was it a warning? A trap? Or a desperate plea from someone inside the web trying to help? Meanwhile, in the SUV, Rachel stared at the exit signs blurring past, her arms wrapped around her daughter like a shield. The man beside her was now on the phone, speaking in rapid-fire code that only intensified her panic. Finally, she spoke. Her voice cracked but strong. "Where are you taking us?" The man didn't answer, but the driver, tense, sweating, muttered something that wasn't meant to be heard. "Too late. She knows. They're gonna wipe it all." Rachel's mind latched onto those last words with an icy grip. Wipe it all. What did that mean? Her memories? Her identity? Or worse, her life? The car turned sharply onto a desolate stretch of road lined with tall, whispering trees. And just as the tension reached a breaking point, something exploded in the distance. A fireball lit up the sky ahead, sending birds scattering, and the vehicle skidding to a halt. The driver shouted, the agent reached for a weapon, and Rachel, without thinking, threw open the door and ran, clutching Emily, running into the woods, into the unknown, into the only direction that wasn't back. But what she didn't know, what no one had yet told her, was that the fireball wasn't random. It was a signal. Someone had just declared war on the people chasing her. And now, she was right in the middle of something much, much bigger than a missing husband or a faked identity. Rachel's lungs burned with every frantic step as she stumbled deeper into the woods, Emily bouncing in her arms, sobbing, tiny fingers gripping her mother's collar like a lifeline. Behind them, the orange glow of the explosion still painted the trees with an eerie light, illuminating the smoke that billowed into the overcast sky. Branches snapped beneath her feet, and thorns tugged at her clothes, but she didn't stop, not until she reached a small clearing where silence finally caught up to her. Only then did Rachel allow herself to collapse against a tree, rocking Emily gently, trying to convince both of them that they were safe. But deep down, she knew they weren't. They were running from something they didn't understand, and what was worse, they didn't even know who they were really running from. Just as she began to consider her next move, a distant noise stirred the air. Not footsteps, not a voice, but a familiar ringtone. A musical chime that had once been Derek's default notification. Rachel froze. It was faint, almost lost in the rustle of leaves, but unmistakable. She turned, followed the sound cautiously, stepping carefully over roots and underbrush, until she came upon a discarded phone half buried under fallen leaves. It was old, scuffed, but when she picked it up, the screen blinked to life with a single notification. Operation Pinch Point. Final extraction confirmed. Her breath caught in her throat. Operation Pinch Point? She had never heard those words before. With trembling fingers, she opened the message thread. It wasn't just Derek's phone. It was a burner, used for encrypted conversations, and every message was with a single contact: Shadowbird. The messages told a story Rachel wasn't prepared for. They weren't from months ago, they were recent. And they weren't about escaping anything. They were about her. Subject seems unaware. One message read: Initiate diversion via secondary asset. Child must be kept alive at all costs. Another read: Rachel has started asking questions. Move Jasmine into position. Prepare for redirection. Rachel dropped the phone as if it had burned her. Her head reeled. They were watching her, planning for her to react a certain way, like every moment of this nightmare had been anticipated. It wasn't random. The crying baby on the plane, the gate change, Jasmine's compassion, it had all been orchestrated. She had been manipulated into believing she was escaping, when in reality, she'd been walked into a larger plan. And that's when it hit her like a freight train. Jasmine wasn't just a rogue flight attendant trying to help her. Jasmine was Shadowbird. The name on the burner's messages. The one giving the orders. Every moment of empathy, every soft word, every carefully timed warning had been part of a script. Jasmine hadn't saved her. Jasmine had handled her. Rachel's chest constricted with a new kind of panic, not one of fear, but of betrayal. She remembered Jasmine's words on the plane, about trusting instincts, about choices, about protecting Emily. But now, with this new layer of truth, it all felt like a cruel performance. And if Jasmine had been manipulating her from the beginning, what else had been a lie? Before she could even process this revelation, Rachel heard a twig snap behind her. She turned around, and there, standing beneath the trees, was Megan. Except Megan looked different. Cold. Serious. Dressed in dark clothes that looked tactical, not civilian. Rachel blinked, unsure if her mind was finally breaking from stress, but the voice that came out of Megan's mouth was calm, direct, and terrifyingly detached. You weren't supposed to find the phone. Rachel backed away slowly, shielding Emily as her voice cracked. What is going on? Why are you here? What is this? Megan stepped forward, her face unreadable. You are the only one who could do this. That's why we picked you. Derek was too obvious. No one would question your grief. You were the perfect delivery system. Rachel shook her head in disbelief. Delivery system? What are you talking about? What did you do to me? Megan's eyes flicked to Emily. It's not about you anymore. It never was. The weight of those words sank in with devastating force. Rachel's gaze dropped to her daughter, and suddenly every strange illness, every odd test, every medical delay over the past few weeks surged back to the surface. Emily wasn't just a passenger on this journey. She was the center of it. They weren't trying to protect Rachel. They were trying to contain her. Contain whatever was inside Emily. But what could a child carry that would drive agencies to manipulate flights, fake identities, destroy evidence, and blow up cars? The answer, Rachel realized with a nauseating clarity, wasn't something she could begin to fathom. But the people chasing them, controlling them, knew exactly what they were doing. And now, so did Megan. As Megan slowly raised a small device from her pocket, something Rachel didn't recognize but instinctively feared, she said one final thing before the woods erupted with the sound of a second explosion, this time much closer. It's time you learned the real reason Derek disappeared. Then everything went white. The ringing in Rachel's ears hadn't faded when her vision began to return, blurred and dancing with streaks of light. Smoke clung to the air, heavy with the acidic bite of scorched electronics and something far more pungent, burned plastic, maybe, or synthetic cloth. She coughed hard and blinked rapidly, trying to separate the chaos from clarity. Emily was still in her arms, shaken but conscious, her little face smeared with dirt and fear. Rachel could barely move, her muscles locked in panic, her mind flooded with questions that seemed to spiral into each other with no end. But one thought screamed louder than the rest. This wasn't random. It never was. And she had no one left to trust. The second explosion hadn't hit them directly, thank God, but it had come close enough to shake the forest floor and rip apart what remained of Rachel's belief that this was just about escape. As she staggered to her feet, something sharp jabbed her side. It was the burner phone she had shoved in her coat pocket. Still intact. Still active. With trembling fingers, she tapped the screen, but it had reset itself. All messages wiped. Just one new notification blinking like a siren. A message that read, "Deliver the child to Station K by 0800 or the truth dies with you." She didn't know what Station K was, but she knew a threat when she saw one. And for the first time since this nightmare began, Rachel felt the full weight of her situation crash down like a collapsing roof. This wasn't about her anymore. It wasn't even about Derek. It was about Emily. Her daughter was the center of something far beyond any mother's intuition, and the people chasing them didn't want answers. They wanted control. Rachel knew then that she couldn't run forever. She had to confront it, whatever it was. But to do that, she would need help. And the only person she could think to call was also the one she feared might be at the center of it all, her brother, Alex. They hadn't spoken since Derek's disappearance. Rachel had always found Alex to be overly pragmatic, distant even when things were personal, too aligned with federal logic and not enough with emotional truth. But Alex had clearance, deep government clearance, and if anyone could tell her what Station K was, it was him. With a heavy heart, she used the old satellite phone Derek had kept hidden in the toolbox under the trunk lining. It wasn't easy to use, but she remembered the code he'd shown her once. The one he said to use, only if the world feels off. When Alex answered, his voice was eerily calm.
Too calm.
"Ratch? Where are you?" Rachel's mouth went dry. "Don't do that. Don't start with questions. I need to know something. What is Station K?" A pause. Too long. That dangerous, loaded silence that precedes a lie, or a truth so brutal it has to be delivered like poison. "You need to bring Emily in," he finally said, voice flat.
No.
"No, you don't get to do that," Rachel snapped, pacing the clearing now, her nerves fraying with every second. You knew what was happening. You let me walk into this blind." "I didn't have a choice," he said quietly, almost a whisper. "None of us did. If I warned you, they would have moved sooner. You think you've been running this whole time, but they were guiding you, Rachel. Guiding you to the outcome they wanted. That's what this has always been. You're a trigger. Emily is the payload." Rachel's heart turned to stone. She sank to her knees, struggling to hold Emily, to breathe, to even exist under the pressure of what she'd just heard. Her brother, the man who had held Emily as a newborn, was now speaking about her like she was a weapon. "She's a little girl," Rachel growled. "She's not some program or formula. She's my daughter." "She's more than that," Alex said, voice tightening. "Whatever Derek gave her, whatever he carried, it's active. It's evolving. That's why they need her alive. But if you keep running, Ratch, they're going to stop needing her alive." Rachel closed her eyes and let the tears fall. Not out of weakness, but out of fury. She had been cornered, stripped of choices. And now she was staring down an ultimatum that shattered her. Deliver her daughter into the hands of people who spoke of her like she was property, or keep running and risk everything. She wanted to scream, to break something, to reach through the phone and shake Alex until the truth spilled like coins from a broken vending machine. But deep down, she knew it wouldn't matter. She had already lost the illusion of control. The only thing left was her will to protect Emily at all costs. "Tell them I'll come," she said finally, her voice trembling with rage. "But only if I get proof Derek's alive." Alex's breath hitched, almost imperceptibly. So he was alive. And just like that, everything shifted again. They hadn't just lied. They had used Derek as leverage from the start. And now Rachel had to ask herself the most agonizing question of all. Was Derek part of this, too? Had he knowingly handed Emily over to be part of some government experiment? Or was he just another pawn who got lost in the game? The doubt coiled inside her like a serpent. She looked down at Emily, her soft eyes heavy with sleep, and realized this wasn't about running anymore. It wasn't even about uncovering the truth. It was about facing it, no matter how painful. And she would. But not on their terms. Rachel wasn't a pawn. She was a mother. And they had just made the mistake of pushing her too far. The only question now was, who would pay the price first? The black SUV was already waiting when Rachel arrived at the isolated service tunnel just outside the decommissioned military base. What she now understood was Station K. She had driven through the night, running only on adrenaline and fractured hope, pushing the ancient Jeep past its limits on back roads that barely showed up on her outdated GPS. Emily was quiet in the back seat, unusually so, as if she could sense the gravity of what was coming. Rachel's fingers trembled as she reached for the pistol Derek had hidden in the false compartment beneath the driver's seat, a last resort move she never thought she'd make. But this wasn't just a mission anymore.
It was war.
The figure who stepped out of the SUV sent a fresh jolt of betrayal down her spine. It wasn't Alex. It wasn't even someone unfamiliar. It was Evelyn, her best friend of over 15 years, godmother to Emily, the one person Rachel had leaned on after Derek disappeared. Evelyn, who had cried with her, held her hand in court, fed her when she couldn't get out of bed. Evelyn, who now stood there wearing a security clearance badge and carrying herself like she belonged to something much bigger, much colder, and much older than anything Rachel had imagined. The sharp, precise movements. The clipped tone. It was like watching a stranger inhabit a familiar shell. "You weren't supposed to make it this far," Evelyn said, not with malice but with weariness, like this was a long shift at a job she hated. "You were supposed to hand her over before you got curious." Rachel's voice cracked as she asked, "Why? Why you?" Evelyn's smile was hollow. "Because I was the only one you wouldn't question." The words landed like a hammer to the chest. Rachel had seen betrayal before, but this was surgical, pre-planned, intimate. It made everything hurt more because it had been so carefully crafted. The weekly dinners, the midnight phone calls, the offers to babysit Emily for just a few hours, all of it had been manipulation. And suddenly, Rachel realized that the truth wasn't buried in the forest, or in Derek's files, or even in Alex's cryptic warnings. It was here, in front of her, wearing Evelyn's face. "They used Derek to develop the base protocol," Evelyn said, her tone turning clinical. "He didn't know what he was building at first. Neither did we. But Emily, she was the breakthrough. Organic integration. Neural adaptability beyond what even DARPA predicted. She's not just a carrier, Rachel, she's the interface." Rachel's knees almost buckled. "You're saying my daughter is a machine?" Evelyn's gaze softened, as if she pitied her.
No.
"Not a machine. She's human. But she's also the first human who can seamlessly communicate with artificial systems. Think defense satellites. Think surveillance grids. Think unmanned tactical response." Rachel could barely comprehend what she was hearing. Emily, the child she had nursed through fevers, taught how to read, watched dance barefoot in the living room, was being spoken about like a living USB drive. A national asset. "They're not going to let her go, Rachel," Evelyn said, stepping closer. "You can scream and cry and shoot your way through this if you want. But at the end of the day, your daughter is the most valuable piece of technology on American soil. And people way above my clearance level have already signed off on what comes next." Rachel wanted to run. She wanted to scream. But instead, she stood her ground. Because now she understood the game. This wasn't about information. It wasn't even about power. It was about control. And the one thing they hadn't factored in, had underestimated from the start, was a mother's refusal to be part of their agenda. She took a step forward, her voice barely above a whisper, but seething with defiance. "You're going to take me to her father. And then you're going to walk away. Or I promise you, Evelyn, everything you've built will burn." There was a flicker in Evelyn's eyes then. Doubt? Regret? Maybe even shame. But behind her, more SUVs rolled into view. And in that moment, Rachel realized the scale of what she was up against. This wasn't just a black site operation. This was part of something national, maybe global. There were other children, other families, Other lies spun into carefully managed narratives designed to pacify the public while rewriting the future in secret labs and unmarked basements. Evelyn didn't respond. She simply turned and signaled to the convoy. The message was clear. Rachel had reached the final level. No more running. No more hiding. Just the truth, however monstrous it might be. But as the ground beneath her seemed to shift with the weight of what was coming, Rachel felt something unexpected surge through her. Resolve. They had underestimated her. All of them. And whatever was waiting inside that facility, she wasn't walking in alone. She was walking in as the only person willing to tear the whole damn thing apart to get her daughter back. And in the distance, buried beneath steel and silence, Derek's voice crackled faintly through the burner phone again. A whisper. A warning.
A key.
And suddenly, everything was about to explode. Inside the steel-reinforced command chamber of Station K, the air was so heavy with tension it practically vibrated. Lights flickered overhead, casting eerie shadows across walls lined with decades of classified history, records, servers, prototypes, and secrets the government would rather die than let leak. Rachel stood in the center of it all, her clothes soaked with rain, dirt, and sweat, her hand trembling slightly around the grip of Derek's sidearm. Emily was beside her now, clutching her hand, silent but alert, her eyes darting toward the glowing wall of data screens where her father's last message had just finished decoding. For a moment, the entire world shrank to this underground bunker and the lives hanging in the balance. Derek's voice had revealed what Rachel had long feared but hadn't dared to admit until now. This wasn't just a rogue experiment. It was a government-sanctioned neural integration program that had used children like Emily as test subjects. And the man orchestrating it all? Director Cole Matthews, head of strategic operations and Rachel's former commanding officer. He emerged from the shadows like a ghost from her past, older now but still carrying that same cold authority in his gait and gaze. He didn't flinch at the sight of the pistol. He didn't even seem surprised that Rachel had made it this far. That, somehow, made it worse. He had expected her to come. Maybe even counted on it. "You should have stayed gone," Cole said calmly, as though they were discussing the weather and not the monstrous truth behind a top-secret military project. "You were a damn good soldier, Rachel. But you were never meant to play hero." Rachel took a shaky breath, the weight of everything pressing against her spine. "You turned my daughter into a weapon." Cole's jaw tightened, a rare crack in his usually emotionless facade. "We gave her purpose." You want to know what Derek was really working on? Project Halo was never about building a machine. It was about unlocking the future of defense. AI-human synthesis. He cracked the code when he realized a child's brain, specifically Emily's, had the neuroplasticity to bond with high-level cognitive processing systems. She's not a pawn, Rachel. She's evolution. You experimented on a child, Rachel snapped. You didn't evolve. You corrupted. And now you're trying to bury everything, including her father. At the mention of Derek, something flickered across Cole's eyes. Pity, maybe. Or guilt. Derek knew the risks. He didn't die because he resisted. He died because he tried to extract Emily. The floor dropped from beneath Rachel's heart. That had never been in the files. The footage had been scrubbed, the reports doctored. All this time, she'd believed Derek was eliminated during a data breach gone wrong, but now she knew the truth. He had tried to save their daughter, and he had paid the ultimate price. Suddenly, alarms blared throughout the facility. On the screens behind them, multiple security feeds glitched, and then went black. Rachel turned to Emily, who was now blinking rapidly, her pupils flickering with digital light. It had started. She was syncing with the system on her own. No headset. No wires. No protocol. Just instinct. She's doing it herself, Rachel whispered. She's overriding you. Cole's expression contorted into something that looked like panic, but it was too late. The entire base was now responding to Emily, not to command. Doors unlocked, lights shut off, and voice recognition modules began repeating a single, chilling phrase. Access granted, operator, E. Carter. Cole lunged toward the console, typing in failsafes and override codes. Rachel raised the gun but hesitated. This wasn't just about stopping him. It was about ending everything he stood for. You used your authority to destroy lives, she said. This ends now. And just then, the room darkened. Not from a power failure, but because Emily had blacked out the entire base. Screens flashed to static. Consoles shut down. A low hum rumbled through the floor as the internal AI began purging all encrypted data, wiping the entire digital infrastructure that had built the conspiracy. Cole looked around, stunned, as his empire unraveled in real time. But it wasn't over yet. In the silence that followed, a new feed activated on the central screen. Surveillance footage, archived logs, biometric files, all being transmitted live to outside sources. Whistleblower outlets, congressional watch groups, international human rights forums. Rachel could hardly breathe as she watched a video file open. Derek's final message to his daughter, recorded just days before he vanished. "You won't remember me the way I remember you, kiddo," Derek said in the recording, his voice rough and weary. "But know this, I didn't die for a program. I died so you could choose who you are, not what they made you to be." The tears hit Rachel like a wave, raw and unstoppable. Emily reached for her, curling into her side as the feed played. And as the last line echoed through the chamber, Cole Matthews did the only thing a man like him could do when faced with total exposure. He pulled a sidearm from under the desk, aimed it at the core terminal, and fired. But the twist came not with the bullet, but with what Emily had done moments before the shot. She had duplicated the entire database, every classified file, every name, every operation, and uploaded it to an off-site server tied to a fail-safe Derek had created long before his death. The entire conspiracy wasn't just exposed, it was backed up, secured, and irreversible. Rachel disarmed Cole before he could do any more damage, knocking the weapon free and pinning him to the ground with a ferocity born of love, rage, and unimaginable loss. As agents stormed the facility moments later, sent by a friendly senator who had received the live data dump, Rachel realized that this was never about revenge or rescue. It was about revelation, and as she walked out of the bunker with Emily beside her, a storm of sirens, agents, and media swirling in the distance, she knew one thing for certain. This wasn't the end of their story. It was only the beginning. Because Emily wasn't just the key to a broken system. She was the one who would change everything. And Rachel would never let the world use her daughter again. But what neither of them noticed as they were driven away in a blacked-out SUV was the shadowy figure watching from a nearby ridge. Someone with a different badge, a different mission, and a very familiar face. The real Alex. Very much alive. And smiling. The weeks that followed were strangely quiet, almost eerily so. Like the aftermath of a massive storm when the wind dies and the wreckage settles into silence. For Rachel, every sunrise felt surreal, as though the world was still catching its breath from the chaos that had nearly swallowed them whole. She and Emily were relocated to a secure location by federal authorities, given new identities and placed under the protection of an oversight committee formed in response to the leaked documents. The media frenzy surrounding Project Halo had triggered a wave of congressional hearings, public outrage, and urgent debates over artificial intelligence ethics and child experimentation. Across every major news outlet in the U.S., from CNN and MSNBC to viral Twitter threads and trending YouTube explainers, Rachel's name was scrubbed, her story reimagined as that of a nameless whistleblower mother who risked everything to stop a rogue government operation. She watched it all unfold from a distance, sipping coffee in the quiet of a rented farmhouse in the Midwest, where cornfields stretched wide like open arms and the sky no longer seemed to carry hidden eyes. Emily, meanwhile, had changed in ways Rachel was still trying to understand. The girl no longer needed to sleep much. Her thoughts sometimes moved faster than her ability to express them. But she wasn't cold or robotic. She was still the same curious, thoughtful child underneath it all, only now with a gaze that saw through people in ways no one could explain. Therapists and neurologists checked in weekly, but most walked away shaking their heads, saying she was unprecedented. Rachel didn't care about the labels. She just wanted her daughter to have a real life, one that wasn't built in a lab or tied to the remnants of Black Ops and classified files. But even with the new names and the fresh start, neither of them could pretend that what happened underground hadn't left scars. Rachel often thought of Derek, of the way his voice had cracked when he said goodbye in that final video, of the sacrifice he made not for country or mission, but for the family they had built in the shadows. His death wasn't in vain, though. The firewall he'd constructed, the server he'd hidden, and the truths he exposed had changed policy. A full-scale audit of covert programs was now underway, and Cole Matthews had been arrested and charged with crimes against humanity. The trial was scheduled for early next year, and although Rachel had been asked to testify, she politely declined. Her war was over. But peace didn't come easy, not when memories stalked her sleep and the ghosts of Station K whispered through the wind. Late at night, she would sit on the porch with Emily beside her, both of them wrapped in a blanket, staring at the stars. They would talk about normal things, movies, books, school, but sometimes, without saying it out loud, they both knew their normal was different. One night, Emily asked, "Will people still come after us?" Rachel didn't lie. She never did. "Maybe," she said, "but we'll be ready." Then, something happened that Rachel hadn't expected. A package arrived, unmarked, untraceable. Inside, she found a simple flash drive and a note, written in familiar, angular handwriting. "It's not over. Watch your six."
A.
Her heart stopped.
Alex.
The real Alex. Somehow alive. Somehow still moving pieces on a board Rachel had thought was swept clean. She plugged in the drive that night, after sending Emily to bed. The files were encrypted, but one image loaded before the screen blinked to black. A blueprint of a new facility, this one in Eastern Europe. Same logos. Same neural interface tech. The project had moved underground again, literally and figuratively. Rachel leaned back in her chair, staring at the blank screen. The resolution she had been craving, the end she thought she'd earned, now felt like just another intermission. But this time, she wasn't alone. She had allies in government now, tech experts, journalists, and most importantly, Emily. A girl who had survived being turned into a machine and instead became a mirror reflecting the system's darkest secrets. As dawn began to break over the golden fields outside, Rachel didn't feel fear. She felt purpose. This wasn't just about revenge or justice anymore. It was about making sure no other family ever endured what hers had. It was about truth, accountability, and choosing who you want to be, even when the world wants to write your script for you. And maybe that's what she had needed all along. Not a final battle, not a courtroom reckoning, but the knowledge that even in a world filled with shadows, there could still be light. She reached for her phone and opened a secure line. Her voice was calm, focused, and resolute. "We need to talk," she said. "There's something coming. And this time, we end it for good." As the call connected and her reflection stared back at her in the screen's glow, one thought lingered in her mind, a quiet, haunting question that would stay with her for years. What if Emily wasn't the only one? And as trending YouTube searches lit up again with conspiracy keywords like government experiment exposed, AI child weapon, and secret neural tech, a new wave of interest surged. But this time, the watchers weren't just viewers. They were participants. And someone, somewhere, was already preparing for what came next.